Has there ever been a moment on a flight that made you realize how much you have had to endure all your life? Have you ever paid in full, done everything right, and still been seen as unworthy just because of your appearance? That morning, in the quiet first class cabin, a white woman casually took the seat Jordan Miles, a successful black CEO, had paid for. But what held the entire flight together was not the seat. It was the way they looked at him, the way they asked him to stand, the way they believed he would stay quiet. That was the moment that forced Jordan to choose. Continue to give in to keep the peace, or stand up not only for himself, but for those who were once looked down upon like him. If it were you, what would you choose? Have you ever kept quiet and let it go? Then gone home and asked yourself, what should I have done differently? Let's join me in today's story, a story not just about a chair, but about dignity, about self-respect, and about the moment a person was so calm that it stopped an entire airline. If you believe that justice is always worth defending, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel before we begin. Denver mornings often bring a thin layer of mist like a silk scarf covering the wide, deserted streets. In Terminal B of Denver International Airport, the white light from high-wattage bulbs reflects off the tile floor, making the space bright but slightly cold, like the feeling of entering an office building before dawn. Jordan Miles leaned lightly against a metal chair, a cup of black, unsweetened coffee in his hand. He liked his coffee black. It was straightforward. No beating around the bush. And this morning, he needed that straightforwardness to keep him awake after nearly a week of meetings in Boulder. Negotiations, signings, client dinners that lasted well past midnight. It all added up to a week that had weighed more heavily than usual on his shoulders. Jordan dressed simply gray jacket, dark jeans, black sneakers, no logos, no expensive watch, no attempt to show off. It was a habit he had when traveling by plane. His modesty made him feel more at peace, especially in a world where people still saw him through the lens of skin color, before seeing the real him. A group of young employees walked by, chatting animatedly about upcoming summer trips. Jordan smiled slightly, not interrupting. He liked to observe people, a habit he had developed in his early days, when he had to build the company while reading every little movement to accurately predict the emotions of the people he met. He sat down in a chair by the window, looking out at the runway, lit by the first rays of sunlight. Planes were parked in rows like steel birds waiting for the signal to take off. He sighed, closed his eyes for a few seconds, and tried to slow his heartbeat. His only goal to get back to New York before evening, in time for dinner with his mother, something he always tried to avoid if possible. While he was lost in the hazy space between the loudspeaker announcement and the sound of tires hitting the floor, a woman passing by caught his eye. Not because of her beauty, but because of her demeanor. She was around 50 years old, wearing a cream-white coat, an expensive handbag, and immaculate high heels. Her face was cold. Her sharp eyes seemed to be examining the whole world. She walked past him as if the path belonged to her, not paying any attention to anyone else. Jordan had seen this type of person many times, in boardrooms, at conferences, in places where appearance mattered more than substance. And almost always, they had one thing in common: they believed the world was rigged for their convenience. Her name, according to the passenger board he happened to catch a glimpse of as the check-in clerk scanned it, was Patricia Coleman? Jordan took another sip of coffee. He didn't care. They went their separate ways, but he still felt a familiar feeling, one that successful black people have to silently walk through, many times being judged before they're even recognized. The loudspeaker announced Flight 482 to New York is now boarding. Jordan stood up and adjusted his jacket. A slight chill from the lobby made him shiver, but his steps were steady. He walked toward the gate and showed his boarding pass to the staff. They smiled and were friendly, unaware that this ordinary man was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar technology company, Miles Innovation Group. Nor did they know that he was one of the secret investors in the airline he was about to board. He liked it. No pretense, no distance. The path from growing up in Houston to where he is now has taught him that few people truly understand him. Most only look at the surface. Jordan stepped onto the jet bridge. The cool air felt refreshing. Inside, he thought of his mother. Of dinner? Of the chicken stew she made when he returned from long business trips. A little warmth eased his mind. The plane appeared with soft yellow lights. Jordan walked into the first-class cabin and found his seat, 1A. He wanted to rest his head and get some sleep before takeoff, but when he reached the first row, his feet stopped. There was someone sitting in seat 1A, the seat he had reserved almost 2 weeks in advance. And that person is Patricia Coleman. Jordan stood still for a few seconds. He looked at her bag, placed neatly. He looked at her smugly crossed legs. He looked at her, glued to her phone screen, as if the entire row belonged to her. A breath of air passed, light but cold. Jordan didn't say anything right away. He could feel his heart rate slowing. Not from anger, but from a familiar feeling. One he thought he had long since overcome the feeling of being overlooked in the very space he had paid for. And that, he knew, was just the beginning of something big. Jordan stood still for a few seconds in front of seat 1A, trying to keep his breathing steady. In the world of flying, it was normal for someone to sit in the wrong seat. But at this moment, he sensed something unusual in the attitude of the person sitting there. It was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was like someone walking into a strange house and thinking they belonged there. Patricia Coleman remained staring at her phone, oblivious to his presence, or maybe she knew, but chose not to look up. Some people take another person's silence as an invitation to move on. Jordan knew that all too well. He took a deep breath, then spoke calmly. "Excuse me, ma'am, I believe you're sitting in my seat." His voice wasn't heated, nor was it sharp. It was a gentle, polite announcement, the way he always chose to start every conversation, even the uncomfortable ones. Patricia raised her head, her pale blue eyes scanning him for a full 3 seconds. Her gaze was like an invisible scanner examining, assessing, then silently concluding. When she caught Jordan's face and skin tone, she raised her eyebrows very slightly, but enough for Jordan to notice. Before he could say more, Patricia spoke up, her voice slightly sarcastic. "Oh, sweetheart, are you sure this is 1A? Jordan shrugged slightly. "Yes, I'm sure." He showed his boarding pass. Position 1A was clearly printed. No mistake. Patricia glanced at him but pretended not to see him. She lifted her chin and smiled slightly. "I think you misread it. I always book the front row. They must have given you the wrong seat." Jordan stood still and he said nothing, just looked. His calmness made the air feel a little tense. Early in his career, when he was just starting out in the business world, he learned that sometimes silence is louder than words. And sometimes people take silence as weakness until they realize they're wrong. He said slowly, "I'm not mistaken. This is my chair." Patricia let out a small laugh. It was a familiar laugh, the kind of laugh of someone who believed they would win simply because they were used to being put first. "Well, I'm already here. You can take the seat behind. It's just one row." In that moment, Jordan felt as if the cabin had shrunk. The sound of the plane's engines, the shuffling of suitcases, the attendants arranging luggage, all of it faded away, leaving an old feeling to well up inside him, a feeling he thought he had buried long ago. When he was young and had just won a scholarship to university, he once walked into a classroom and was mistaken for a staff member in charge of equipment. A colleague once told him to sit in the back row so he could see the board better. An investor asked him, "Isn't the real CEO coming?" Those memories passed like bubbles. They no longer hurt him. They just reminded him that there were battles he didn't choose, but they forced upon him. Jordan didn't speak at once. He just stood there, his eyes soft but unwavering. The way he looked at her unnerved Patricia a little, but she tried to keep her composure. A flight attendant, a young woman named Emily Price, walked by and stopped when she saw the two standing across from each other. "Sir, is everything all right here?" Patricia smiled brightly, turned to Emily, and looked gentle and polite. "Yes, this gentleman seems confused about his seat." Emily looked at Jordan. Jordan took out his boarding pass. She checked it, frowning. Ma'am, he is right. This is his seat. Patricia kept her authoritative composure. Oh, there must be some mistake. I sit in 1A every time I fly this route. Check again. Emily checked again. The result was the same. 1A. The name was Jordan Miles. Her voice became more cautious. Ma'am, your ticket shows 2C. Patricia glanced at her phone screen. It was 2C, but she didn't want to admit it. Look, I came early. I'm already settled. He can take 2C just for today. It's basically the same. Jordan felt a cold mist curl around his chest. Not because of what Patricia said, but because of how she said it. The way she considered the seat as a small matter. The way she considered the change as a small matter. The way she considered him even smaller. He said again, his voice as flat as a line I paid for 1A. Patricia Coante. And I'm already sitting here. That moment, without a loud voice, without chaos, was where all the conflicts that followed began. A moment so small that many would overlook it. But it was that smallness that touched a very large wound. Jordan felt his heart tighten. He looked at the chair, then at Patricia. In that moment, he thought of his mother, who had always told him, "You don't always have to fight, but there are times when if you don't stand up, you'll lose more than your seat." And I know, today is one of those times. That moment wasn't the climax, but it was the tinderbox of all that was to come. Emily bit her lip, looking at the two, confused. Jordan spoke slowly, each word firmly. I need you to call the cabin supervisor. I want to handle this properly. Emily nodded slightly, walking faster. Jordan stood still, not angry, not upset. Just a deep, resounding silence. Patricia sighed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. A passenger in seat 1B glanced at Jordan, his eyes a mixture of sympathy and anticipation. No one spoke, but they all sensed something unusual was unfolding. Jordan adjusted his shoulders, took a deep breath, and steadied his breathing. He didn't want to make a scene, but he knew better than anyone that sometimes you don't get to pick your battles. The battle will come, and sometimes it starts right from a chair. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was more still than usual. Nearby passengers pretended to be engrossed in their phones or magazines, but their eyes, though they tried to avoid it, occasionally glanced at Jordan and Patricia. Those furtive glances were filled with outsider curiosity, mixed with a hint of unnamed concern. Jordan stood there, his hands at his sides. He didn't look upset, nor did he look confused. But deep inside, a nagging feeling was rising, the kind that successful black people sometimes carry as an unchosen part of their identity. The sound of approaching footsteps made him open his eyes. Jacob Hart, the flight's purser, appeared from the back of the cabin, followed by Emily Price. Jacob was a middle-aged man, of average height, with neatly combed light brown hair. His expression had the usual professionalism of someone who had worked in the aviation industry for a long time. Not cold, but not warm either. His face was like a calm lake. It was hard to tell what lay beneath. Emily took a step forward and whispered, "Jacob, this is a passenger who needs assistance." Jacob nodded, looking at Jordan first. He gave a polite, service-oriented smile. "Sir, is there a problem with your seat?" Jordan handed over his boarding pass, his voice calm. "I booked seat 1A, and this woman is sitting there." Jacob looked at his boarding pass. Everything was clear. He turned to Patricia. She smiled immediately, as if the wrong seat assignment had been a minor misunderstanding. "Oh, Jacob, good. I think he's confused. I already settled in." And he looks like Patricia didn't finish her sentence. She hesitated, searching for the words. Jordan knew exactly what she was going to say, but she stopped herself not because she was embarrassed, but because she knew that saying it out loud would get her in trouble. Jacob pursed his lips and asked, "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass, please?" Patricia took out her phone. The boarding pass showed seat 2C. Jacob read, but instead of stating it clearly as he should have, he frowned slightly, then spoke in a voice so soft, so gentle, so soft that Jordan felt a shiver run down his spine. Ma'am, your seat seems to be 2 rows back. 2C. Patricia laughed, her voice clear. That seat is terrible. I can't sit there. I always fly in the first row. Jordan watched Jacob's every move. The purser didn't show any obvious favoritism, but what bothered Jordan was the hesitation in Jacob's eyes, as if moving Patricia back to her place was a difficult decision, and asking Jordan to switch would be much easier. Jacob turned back to Jordan, his voice dropping to a half whisper. Sir, I understand the situation. I really do. But to keep the boarding smooth, would you consider moving to 2C for this flight? A moment of silence, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. A silence filled the cabin. Jordan looked straight at Jacob. His eyes were not angry, but deep, like the bottom of a well, where you look down and see your own reflection. Why should I move? Jordan asked slowly. This seat is mine. Jacob swallowed. He hadn't expected that question. Polite people often gave in. It was something he saw every day in his line of work. Sir, it would help us depart on time. A familiar excuse, a phrase millions of passengers have heard somewhere. But for Jordan, it had a different meaning. Is keeping a flight on time more important than being treated fairly, he asked, not raising his voice. Jacob paused slightly, his eyes showing a troubled look. In the next row, a man around 60 with silver hair shook his head slightly, whispering very softly but loud enough for Jordan to hear. This doesn't feel right. Jordan let out a sigh. He didn't want to complicate things. He just wanted to go home. But the way Jacob spoke, the way Patricia made excuses, the way everything repeated itself so many times before, it was all testing the limits of the composure he'd spent years building. Patricia crossed her arms and exhaled heavily as if Jordan were bothering her. Oh, come on, he looks strong. He can sit anywhere. Then she waved her hand. Let's not make a fuss. Jordan closed his eyes for a second. An image flashed through his mind, the image of 12-year-old Jordan standing next to his father at the parent-teacher conference, mistaken for the janitor's son. That day, his father had simply placed his hand on his shoulder and said, You don't need to prove it to everyone. But sometimes, if you stay silent, people will think they are right. And now, in North Star Airways first class, he heard that sentence again in his mind. Jordan opened his eyes. I'm not moving seats. He enunciated, I paid for 1A. This is my spot. Jacob let out a soft breath, one that no one but him would have heard. He looked at Patricia, who was looking impatient, then at Jordan. Doubt crossed his face, an unwelcome shadow. Emily stood back, awkward, but her eyes were on Jordan supportive, though she dared not say it aloud. Jacob decides, sir. Please wait here. I will call the captain. Patricia jumped up immediately, her voice louder than necessary. Yes, call the captain. This is ridiculous. Jordan didn't respond. He stood there like a tree in the wind, flexible but unbreakable. At that moment, every eye in the cabin turned to him. No more furtive curiosity. No more polite avoidance. Everyone knew. What was happening before them was more than just the chair. It is a story about how people treat each other. And how one chooses to stand up. Jordan inhaled. Slowly. He knew he was walking into a situation he didn't want to be in. But he didn't back down. Not for a chair. Not for a... Backing down now would mean allowing another part of his dignity to be crushed. He was so used to it. But today, he didn't want to be used to it anymore. The air in the first-class cabin seemed to have been sucked out. Every movement was more cautious, more reserved, as if a storm were just outside the door but had not yet entered. Jordan felt that familiar feeling. The feeling when silence becomes an invisible pressure on a decent person's shoulders. Jacob Hart left the front row and strode toward the front of the cabin, where the crew call button connected to the cockpit. Emily Price remained there for a few seconds, her eyes glancing anxiously between Jordan and Patricia, like someone standing on two shores with waves on both sides. Sir, I'm sorry, she said softly, almost in a whisper. I know this shouldn't have happened. Jordan nodded slightly. He didn't blame her. Emily was the only one who hadn't tried to avoid the truth so far. "It's okay," he replied, his voice low and calm. "Thank you." Emily bit her lip and left. In that moment, Jordan accidentally caught the eyes of the man in seat 1B. He nodded slightly as a silent encouragement. Jordan responded with a small nod. It was a small gesture, but it warmed his heart a little in the thick tension. Patricia leaned back in her chair, sighing loudly in response, a sigh she intended for everyone to hear. She crossed her legs and spoke to herself. Loud enough to reach Jordan's ear, "This is wasting everyone's time." Jordan didn't answer. He had never believed in direct, loud, explosive confrontation that would earn respect. He believed in a slower kind of strength, the strength of determination. But he also knew that determination sometimes made people think he was weak. The footsteps became heavier, more regular, cutting through the air. Jacob returned, followed by a tall man in a neatly pressed navy blue captain's uniform. 2 silver epaulets hung from his shoulders. His face was sharp, his features straight, showing the hard lines of a man who had spent thousands of hours in the air and hundreds of awkward situations on the ground. "That's Captain Rhodes." He didn't speak at once. He looked at Jordan first, a quick, direct, unabashed look. Then he turned to Patricia, then to Jacob. "Tell me what's going on." His voice was not loud, but it was sharp as a knife, the kind of sound that made the listener automatically stand up a little straighter. Jacob was the one to speak. "Captain, there seems to be a seat dispute between these 2 passengers." Rhodes turned back to look at Jordan. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Jordan handed over his boarding pass without a moment's hesitation. Rhodes looked at it. He nodded slightly. 1A. "Correct." He turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, may I see yours as well?" Patricia reluctantly handed over the phone. Rhodes looked at the screen, frowned, and spoke bluntly. 2C. That is your assigned seat." In that moment, Jordan thought it was over. A clear decision from the highest authority on the plane. A look that was enough to tell Patricia she needed to get up and go back to her seat. But real life isn't always that simple. Patricia let out an annoyed laugh. "Yes, but I sat here first. And I cannot sit in 2C. That row is too cramped. And I always fly 1A." Rhodes exhaled softly, but Jordan heard it. It wasn't angry, not resentful, but tired. The tiredness of someone who'd been surrounded by too many stubborn people in his life. "Ma'am," Rhodes said, his voice calm but sharp. "Plane seating is not based on habit. It's based on assignment." Patricia tilted her head, raising one eyebrow. "Well, maybe you can make an exception. He doesn't seem to mind sitting elsewhere." "Right." Her eyes, though unspoken, still directed at Jordan with contempt. Jordan kept his eyes steady. "Did I say I didn't mind?" he asked, his voice unchanged in tone. Patricia paled slightly from being stopped, but still tried to counterattack. "It's just a seat." Jordan smiled slightly, but the smile was not warm. "Just because it's just a chair, there's no reason for me to give up what's mine." Rhodes looked at Jordan for a moment. He seemed to be weighing fairness against convenience, a choice many in the service industry have had to make. Finally, Rhodes turned to Jacob. "We need to depart soon. We can't afford a delay." Jordan heard it. The whole cabin heard it. And he felt a painful familiarity when the right person is asked to give way to the wrong person, just because it is more convenient. Jacob whispered, "Sir, maybe just this once." For the sake of schedule, Jordan closed his eyes for a second longer than usual. A second filled with thought, hurt, and old conversations he had with himself. He opened his eyes, his gaze softened, but did not retreat. "I will not give in." Her voice was small, but the cabin seemed to shake, not because of the volume, but because of the certainty in each word. Rhodes looked at him for a few more seconds. His gaze held not judgment, but understanding, as if he understood the man before him was holding more than a chair. "He is holding on to his dignity." Rhodes sang, "Patricia, ma'am, you need to move to 2C." Patricia stood up abruptly, her voice breaking with anger. This is discrimination. I got here first. A passenger in the back said, No, ma'am. This is accountability. The air began to stir. A few people clapped. Others nodded. Jordan stood still, saying nothing. He knew this support was not for who he was, but because they recognized what was happening was wrong. Patricia looked around, seeing that all eyes were no longer on her. She blushed, her lip trembled, but she still tried to hold on to something. She turned to Rhodes. So you'll let him hold this flight hostage? Jordan looked up at Rhodes. He wasn't afraid of the question, afraid, because he knew he wasn't a hostage. Rhodes replied slowly, No, I'm preventing you from doing that. It was the first time since entering the cabin that Jordan saw Patricia completely speechless. That moment, brief as it was, marked a clear change. An invisible line between right and wrong had been drawn, and Jordan knew the real battle had just begun. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was like a stretched string, ready to explode with a piercing sound at the slightest touch. Patricia stood less than a step in front of Captain Rhodes, her hands gripping the strap of her handbag as if it was the only thing that allowed her to maintain some semblance of authority in this situation. Jacob Hart stood back a little. His shoulders slumped slightly, the look of someone trying to avoid being the center of attention, even though he was the one who had started off on the wrong foot by making the unfair suggestion. Jordan was still standing in front of his seat 1A. The way he stood made people stare. Not because he was strong, not because he was loud, but because he was quiet. A silence with weight. It makes the observers feel like they have to readjust their spines. Captain Rhodes turned around, looking straight at Jordan, as if to confirm one last thing, sir. If you could just move to 2C for this flight, we can avoid a delay. Are you absolutely sure you won't reconsider? Jordan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had shaken with fear when he signed his first contract. The hands that had held his father's when they were asked to leave the store by mall security because they were not in the target customer group. The hands that had touched his mother's thin shoulders when she cried because people said her son didn't look like someone who would go far. That hand is no longer shaking. Jordan raised his head, his voice very small, but clear enough for the whole compartment to hear, I will not give in. In that moment, though no one spoke, everyone understood this answer was not for Captain Rhodes alone. It was for the past, for today, for the nameless pain of many who had been overlooked. Rhodes was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slightly. He turned to Patricia. Ma'am, please return to your assigned seat. Patricia opened her eyes wide. Are you serious? He's the one making this difficult? A man in row 2A, curly gray hair, looking like a university professor, spoke up immediately. No, ma'am. He's not. He's simply asking for what he paid for. A woman in a pastel cardigan sitting next to him nodded vigorously. He's right. You're the one in the wrong seat. Patricia glared, scanning the cabin, as if in disbelief that anyone would dare take Jordan's side. But her face quickly hardened when she realized no one was looking at her with sympathy. Her lips trembled, but she still managed to say, You all don't understand. I have back issues. Have back. I can't sit anywhere but the front row. Jordan listened, but he didn't react. He was used to people making excuses when they were wrong, but not wanting to admit it. Captain Rhodes said bluntly, Ma'am, medical accommodations must be declared before boarding. Not afterward. You need to move. Patricia turned to Jordan, her voice full of venom. Look at what you're doing. All because of a seat. Jordan looked directly at her for the first time during the conversation. A look that wasn't angry, not hateful, but contained the weariness of someone who had been asked too many times to bear with it a little longer. It's not just a seat, Jordan said slowly. It's respect. She fell silent. The whole compartment fell silent. A young man behind whispered, That's the truth. A few murmurs of agreement were heard. Patricia took a step back, her expression changing from anger to confusion. She wasn't used to being pushed into a corner like this, especially in front of so many people, especially when faced with a man she thought she could easily dominate. Rhodes looked at Jacob. Escort her to 2C. Jacob nodded, but before he could move toward Patricia, she tugged on his sleeve. Don't you touch me, I'm a loyal customer. I've been flying with North Star for 15 years. Jacob stepped back slightly, trying to keep his voice soft, ma'am. I need you to cooperate so we can begin pushback. She glared at Jordan again. He's enjoying this, isn't he? Jordan just sighed. No, I just want to be treated right. Something about that moment softened the entire cabin, as if people suddenly understood that the man before them was not looking to win or lose. He just wanted to be normal, like every other passenger. Patricia looked around again. No one defended her. No one pitied her. And for the first time, Jordan saw something very human in her eyes. Helplessness. But that loneliness did not stop her from saying the last sentence. You're making this a big deal because you think you're special. Jordan replied in a voice as light as the wind. I don't think I'm special. I just think I'm equal. An older woman, silver hair, red scarf, spoke louder. Son, you're doing the right thing. Jordan bowed slightly to her as a thank you. Patricia turned away, her shoulders shaking with anger or shame, she wasn't sure. She picked up her bag and dragged herself down the narrow aisle, her heels clicking dryly on the floor. Jacob followed right behind, as per procedure. The other passengers watched in silence. No one laughed. No one filmed her retreat. They just looked as if they were witnessing something more important than an argument on a plane. Jordan stood still, watching. Despite Patricia's bad attitude, he wasn't happy to see her pushed back. There was only peace in his heart, the feeling of something right being put back in its place. When Patricia sat down in seat 2C, she bowed her head so low that Jordan couldn't see her face. He couldn't tell if she was blushing from embarrassment or biting her teeth from pride. Maybe both. The plane was eerily quiet. No smoke. No yelling. No commotion. There was only a long silence. Jordan looked at seat 1A, his seat, and finally sat down. The feel of his back against the soft leather made him let out a long breath. A breath that was filled with layers of emotions relief, discomfort, pride, and a dull ache he couldn't quite name. Emily walked by and whispered, I'm glad you stood your ground. Jordan smiled slightly, a smile that wasn't entirely happy but very genuine. Thank you. In that moment, he looked out the window. Outside, the vast expanse of Denver stretched out, the morning sun shining on the fuselage of another plane as if to say that things continued. The world continued. Even though the small moments carried great weight, Jordan leaned his head back in the chair. His heart beat more steadily. You know what just happened doesn't stop here? It's just the first chapter of a larger story. A story that he never expected to be the center of attention. A story that in a few minutes, just a few minutes, would change the entire flight. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin, after Patricia was forced to sit down in 2C, still had not returned to normal. It was as if the tension had not dissipated, but had instead condensed into a thin layer of mist, hanging between the rows of ash-gray leather seats. Everyone remained silent, but it was the silence of people waiting to see if the matter was really over, or not. Jordan buckled his seatbelt. He leaned back in seat 1A, but his body still carried the alertness that had been instinctive since his youth. Though he appeared calm on the outside, inside he was like a deep pool with many undercurrents. He gently closed his eyes, trying to regain his steady breathing. But then a small sound came from behind, the sound of a bag being pulled, the sound of something falling to the floor. A woman gasping. Jordan opened his eyes. Patricia Coleman bent down to pick up the small box that had fallen. Her face was red, as if all the humiliation of her life had been condensed into that brief moment. She looked down at the object in her hand, a box of back pain pills. She muttered, but loud enough for those nearby to hear a stupid day, stupid plane, stupid people. Jordan sensed that the last sentence was not said to the air. At position 1A, he did not turn back. But each word still entered his ears like needles. A man in seat 1B, the gray-haired professor, leaned over and whispered to Jordan, Don't let her get to you. Son. Jordan nodded. The reminder felt like a hand on his shoulder when things started to tilt. A warmth inside him in the midst of a space that was starting to cool again. Emily walked past, trying to smile kindly. But Jordan caught her worried look. She clearly knew things weren't quite right. Jordan wondered, could it ever be as simple as a mistake and an apology? But he knew the answer. For people like Patricia, it never stopped at a chair. Captain Rhodes returned to the cockpit after the incident had calmed down. But as soon as he entered, he noticed Jacob still standing by the cabin door, his face gloomy. Something else, Rhodes asked, lowering his voice. Jacob looked down, then whispered, "She says she's going to file a complaint. About me? And about him." Him? Rhodes frowned. The man in 1A? Rhodes narrowed his eyes, as if sensing something bad. Jacob continued. "She said he intimidated her, and that I didn't protect her." Rhodes clenched his jaw. He had been flying for more than 20 years, and he knew how explosive an accusation like this could be. Not because it was true, but because it came from someone who could never admit he was wrong. Let me guess. Rhodes Noi. Yongju. She didn't mention that she sat in the wrong seat. Jacob sighed. No, she didn't. Rhodes was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I'll handle it." In row 2C, Patricia was still restless. She leaned left, then right, clenched her fists, opened them. Her palms were sweating. Maybe her back really hurt, or maybe her pride hurt. Suddenly, she stood up. "Excuse me, I need to speak to the purser again." Bata Lontieng. Emily walked over, trying to keep her voice gentle. "Ma'am, we're preparing for takeoff. Please stay seated." Patricia pointed at Jordan. "He made me uncomfortable. I feel unsafe. I want him moved, or I want him removed from this flight." The whole cabin was silent. Jordan stopped completely. That statement, "I feel unsafe," was not new to him. It was one that had gotten him asked to leave stores, followed by security and met with unreasonable suspicion. It's a sentence many people of color have faced as a kind of judgment without evidence. Jordan took a deep breath. A silent pain arose inside him. Not because of the words, but because he knew this wasn't about safety. It was about prejudice. Emily glared at Patricia, "Ma'am. He didn't do anything." Patricia raised her voice. "I don't care. I want him away from me." The other passengers began to murmur, "She's pushing it too far. This is ridiculous." Captain Rhodes appeared again. His face was no longer as calm as before. He walked over to Patricia, standing between her and Jordan. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but clear, "you cannot make false claims about another passenger." Patricia recoiled. "I'm not making anything false." He glared at me. Jordan laughed softly, not happily, but sadly. The air alone makes her uncomfortable. Rhodes interrupted immediately. "That's enough. Ma'am, sit down. Now." But Patricia still refused. "I won't sit until you guarantee he won't threaten me again." Rhodes sighed a long, weary sigh. "Ma'am, the only disruption on this flight right now is coming from you." The whole cabin fell silent, then began to nod in agreement. Patricia pursed her lips, but for the first time from beginning to end, there was a hint of fear in her eyes. "You're all on his side." Jordan turned for the first time. He looked at her, not accusingly, not angrily, just the look of someone tired of keeping calm for too long. "No one is on my side," Jordan said softly. "They are only on the side of what is right." Patricia shook her head, tears of anger welling up in the corners of her eyes. "I won't stay in this seat." Rhodes folded his arms. "Then you have one last option. You can exit the aircraft." The space seemed to explode with silence. Patricia opened her mouth. You're kicking me off." Rhodes replied, "I'm giving you the choice you refuse to give others." An elderly woman clapped first a decisive, clear clap that echoed throughout the cabin. Then the whole cabin began to respond. Not applause and mockery, but applause because justice is finally being called by its rightful name. Patricia looked around, as if realizing the whole world was turning its back on her, not because of who she was, but because she had tried to make wrong right. She shivered, then slowly sat down. Finally, she said nothing more. Jordan turned back to look out the window. He wasn't happy. He hadn't won. He was just sad. Sad that such a small story can contain so many layers of prejudice. He closed his eyes. A slight pain ran through his heart, not physical, but mental. And he understood it was not over yet, because what just happened will spread faster than you think. After Patricia returned to 2C in silence, the atmosphere in first class seemed to stabilize. But it was only a surface stability, a stability that, beneath it, underground currents were still quietly shifting. Jordan leaned back in his chair, feeling his heartbeat slow after the series of incidents. The cabin had quieted, but inside him, there was still an indescribable aftertaste, a kind of fatigue that came not from the body, but from having to keep himself calm for too long, too often. He closed his eyes slightly, trying to organize his thoughts, but a small voice rang out from beside him. "Sir, if you need water or anything, I can bring it." It was Emily, and she stood there, her hands clasped together, her voice soft and sincere. Not like a service industry formula, it sounded like someone who truly cared. Jordan opened his eyes and smiled slightly. "Thank you, but I'm fine." Emily looked at him for a few seconds, then said, as if she couldn't help it, "I'm really sorry it happened like this. It shouldn't have happened. Not to you, not to anyone." Jordan replied, "I know. You did the right thing." Emily bowed her head, but at that very moment, Patricia suddenly raised her voice, not loud, but sharp as a knife. "Oh, so now you're taking his side figures." A few passengers sighed again, but Patricia fell silent immediately after seeing Captain Rhodes' warning look. Jordan didn't respond. He just looked out the window. The Denver morning sky was clear but cool, the sunlight streaming in through the windows brightening the cabin, a clear brightness that contrasted with the emotions he had just experienced. Jacob Hart stood at the back of the cabin, whispering to a male flight attendant. Jordan caught the words incident report, uncooperative passenger, and protocol. He knew those procedures, he understood they were in place to keep people safe, but sometimes they became a talisman for wrongdoers to use to cover up their actions. Jordan sighed, his hand unconsciously touching his left wrist where the watch his father had given him lay. It was a cheap watch, not like the luxury items most first-class passengers wore him, but to him, its value lay beyond its monetary value. He suddenly remembered his father's words. "No matter where you go, don't let anyone make you forget who you are." He took a deep breath. That was why he was standing strong today. But the silence was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Jacob Hart appeared, his face much more serious than before. He held a tablet, the flight control panel. He said, "Sir, Captain Rhodes would like to confirm some information before we complete the incident report." Jordan was a little surprised. What information? Jacob cleared his throat, as if trying to speak in the most neutral way possible. "We need to know if you are a North Star Priority customer, or have a business account, membership card, or similar special program." A passenger behind blurted out, "Why does that matter? He paid for his seat." Jacob was a little confused. "This is standard procedure when there is a seat dispute." Jordan looked at him for a few seconds. Part of him wanted to stay silent. Another part wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. Finally, he spoke simply and truthfully. "I have a business account." Jacob tapped on the tablet. Jordan paused for a second, then added calmly, "Without boasting, I also have a shareholder account." Jacob looked up, slightly startled. "Individual shareholders," Jordan nodded. "Correct?" Jacob did not understand the extent, so he asked, as is the habit of the person doing the procedure, "How many shares do you own?" "Let me mark the correct classification in the system." Jordan looked at his hand, then said slowly, "About 3%? The tablet in Jacob's hand fell onto his lap. Luckily, he caught it before it hit the floor. 1% of shares is already a lot. 3%? For a normal person, it's an almost unimaginable number. Jacob blinked repeatedly, as if his brain was trying to reload the information. You. You are a senior shareholder of North Star Airways. Jordan didn't answer right away. He just nodded a small, tired nod, as if this were nothing to brag about. But the cabin doesn't think so. A person in row 1B almost dropped the magazine. The woman in the 3A covered her mouth. A few passengers exchanged stunned glances, and Patricia, sitting in 2C, who had just accused him of threatening, turned around in her chair as if someone had pulled her hard. Wait. What? She squeaked. He's a what? Jordan turned his head, looking directly at her for the first time. His voice was low, clear, and calm. I am one of the major shareholders of the company. No need to say more. Patricia turned pale. Her face turned from red to white, then to a pale gray, as if someone had drained all the blood from her. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Jacob quickly entered the information into the system. The tablet made a ding sound confirming the special classification. He immediately stood up straight like a soldier who had just discovered that his superior was 10 ranks higher than him. Mr. Miles, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Jordan waved his hand lightly. No need to apologize, and I'm just a passenger like everyone else. But the cabin knows no one is like everyone else when they own 3% of a national airline. Emily appeared shortly after, her face shocked. You are a shareholder. Jordan smiled softly. I'm just doing my job. But Patricia could not speak. She pointed at Jordan, her hands shaking. You tricked me. You let me. Jordan replied in a voice so sincere that it silenced the whole cabin. I didn't lie to you. I just didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I thought you didn't need to know. At that moment, no one laughed. No one was sarcastic. Because there was something painful about that statement. Not physical pain, but pain because the truth was so obvious. If Jordan wasn't a shareholder, if he was just a regular passenger, would Patricia have stopped? Patricia gasped, her eyes red perhaps more from embarrassment than remorse. Captain Rhodes returned, listening to Jacob's quick report. His face fell. He looked at Jordan. Mr. Miles, on behalf of North Star Airways, I sincerely apologize for everything that happened. Jordan nodded slightly. I know you did your part. But Rhodes shook his head. No, sir. It's my job to protect each passenger equally. And it didn't work out the right way. A heavy silence fell. Patricia bowed her head, not daring to look up. Jordan looked out the window again. It was still light. But something inside him had changed. He didn't want to win. He didn't want anyone to be humiliated. He wanted only one thing: respect. And today, it was reclaimed, but at no small cost. He sighed. Hopefully this is the last time something like this happens. Rhodes put his hands on the back of the chair opposite and nodded slowly. I will make sure of that. But Jordan knew this story, from now on, no longer belonged to him alone. It will leave this plane, spread, and ignite things you don't expect. Once the news of Jordan's ownership of the airline was confirmed, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted to a different emotional level. Gone was the wary curiosity or the secret glances. Instead, everything gradually settled into a respectful silence, the kind of silence of people who have just realized that what they've witnessed is bigger than they thought. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed to be spinning in a storm of her own making. Her hands trembled in her lap, and the cream silk scarf around her neck twisted as she unconsciously tightened her grip. Jordan remained seated in seat 1A, neither proud nor triumphant. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the sky outside the window. The fact that he was a major shareholder did not please him. It only opened up a different kind of weariness, the kind of weariness where his identity was defined by his position and power, rather than who he was as a person. A man in row 1B finally broke the heavy atmosphere. "Mr. Miles, if you need anything, just say so. I think we're all here with you." His voice was calm, deep, carrying the warmth of an experienced person. Jordan turned and nodded slightly in thanks. An elderly woman in row 3A immediately interjected. "And if you ever need a witness, I recorded part of what happened earlier." A young man in the back also raised his phone. "Me too. I don't post anything online, unless you want me to." Jordan frowned slightly. "I'm not looking for a fuss. Thanks. But I want things to be resolved properly, without someone having to fight for me." The woman at 3A smiled gently. "You don't understand, dear. Sometimes silence is also the weapon of the wrong people." The remark made Jordan pause. He knew she was right, and he understood this endorsement was not to glorify him, but to point out a truth that had been distorted for too long. At the front of the cabin, Captain Rhodes looked back at the cabin for a long moment before returning to the cockpit. He whispered to a male flight attendant, "Ground monitoring needs to know about this. The report can't be one-sided." Jacob Hart, the purser, stood against the cabin wall, his eyes filled with a remorse he had never shown before. He looked at Jordan, then at the floor, as if struggling with guilt. Finally, he stepped closer. "Mr. Miles, I want to apologize," Jacob said, his voice low and hoarse. "I took the wrong course of action. I I thought more about keeping the flight on time than about doing the right thing." Jordan looked at him for a few seconds, then said softly, "I don't need you to be ashamed. I just need you to remember. Next time, the right person shouldn't be asked to back down." Jacob bowed his head. "I understand, and I promise." Emily stood nearby, her face awash with relief and joy. Perhaps in that moment, she felt Jordan was teaching a lesson not just to the passengers, but to her own team as well. In the compartment, Patricia was still shaking. She glanced at Jordan, then looked away. No more challenging eyes. No more mocking tone. Now there was only the panic of someone realizing she had crossed the line of social acceptance. But it was in Patricia's nature to not give up easily. After a while, she took a deep breath, trying to regain what little confidence she had left. She called the flight attendant. Emily walked over, her voice calm. "Yes, ma'am." Patricia kept her voice low, but full of frustration. "I want to speak to ground operations when we land. I will complain about this disrespectful and biased treatment." Someone behind him chuckled not happily, but boredly. "Emily keeps it professional. I will report back to you about your request." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her eyes red. It can't end like this. Jordan heard the words clearly, but he chose to remain silent. He did not want to add fuel to the fire, but something in his heart throbbed that someone like Patricia would still not see the truth, even when it was right in front of her. A moment later, passenger 1B leaned slightly toward Jordan and whispered, "Son, don't let this haunt you. You handled it with the strength that many people learn over a lifetime." Jordan smiled slightly but sincerely. "I'm just tired. Really tired. This kind of thing happens too much." The man placed his hand on his shoulder, gently but firmly. "I understand. And I guess all of us people who have seen injustice understand. But today, thanks to you, an airplane cabin saw clearly what is right." Jordan felt a lump in his throat as he listened. He turned his face away from the window to hide his expression. The pale blue sky outside seemed wider through his eyes, which were heavy with thought. In row 2C? Patricia suddenly said something unexpected. "He only got treated like this because he's rich?" The statement made several people turn around. An elderly woman said immediately, "No, ma'am. He got treated like this because he's right." Another young man added, "And because you were wrong. Very wrong." Patricia trembled, as if each word was a slap in the face. Jordan didn't turn around. He didn't want to fight anymore. He wanted it over with. But the people around him weren't willing to let Patricia continue to twist the story. Man 1B said in a calm voice. He didn't need to be a shareholder for anyone to see the truth. We saw it long before that. 1 second. 2 seconds. Patricia swallowed. For the first time, she was completely at a loss for an answer. Jordan closed his eyes. The words of those around him weren't meant to protect him. They were meant to protect the truth. It made him feel relieved in a very human way. Very human. It had been a long time since he felt that feeling, the feeling of not having to fight alone. Captain Rhodes returned to the cabin, walking down the aisle with the dignity characteristic of one in charge. He looked at Jordan first, then at the cabin, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be taking off in a few minutes." Then he turned to Jordan and said in a low voice, "Mr. Miles, thank you for keeping calm. Not everyone has that kind of patience." Jordan replied, "I just did the right thing." Rhodes looked at him and nodded solemnly. And sometimes, doing the right thing is the hardest. Jordan leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. No one knew what he was thinking, but he knew today's events would be a catalyst for something bigger. And deep down, he felt a vague anxiety that things were about to turn a new chapter. A chapter he wasn't actively writing, but it was coming towards him very quickly. The plane finally lifted off the ground. The wheels retracted into the engine bay with a deep click, and everything changed to the soft sound of air cutting under the wings. Jordan felt the plane's fuselage shake slightly, then felt his body lift into the air. But even at a height of thousands of feet, his chest felt as heavy as if someone had placed a boulder on it. He didn't want to think about what had happened anymore, but the human mind wasn't a switch that could be turned on or off at will. Patricia's words, her looks, her sighs, her blaming, they all seemed to linger somewhere. A while later, when the plane was stable, the flight attendant served breakfast. Emily handed Jordan his tray first. Not because he was a shareholder, but because he was sitting in row 1. But when she put the tray down in front of him, she bowed her head slightly. "If you need anything else, I'm right here." Jordan smiled. "You worked hard." She shook her head and whispered, "No, you are the one who is having a hard time." In the back, Patricia Coleman sat rigid in her seat, her head turned toward the window but not looking out. Her face was pale, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles were white. She dared not breathe loudly, nor did she dare cause more trouble. But her eyes were bitter, as if what hurt her most was not that she was wrong, but that those around her saw her wrong. The atmosphere became more mature. People started talking not to gossip, but to share. In seat 1B, the gray-haired professor opened his laptop and whispered, "So, I've seen a lot of similar things, but I've rarely seen anyone as calm as you." Jordan Quee sang, "Calmness is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a scar." The old man chuckled softly. "Wow, and that's right." A businesswoman in row 2A leaned forward. "I caught the part where she said you threatened me. I was going to delete it, but thought you should keep it just in case." Jordan shook his head. "I don't want to turn this into a war. I just want the right lesson to fall in the right place." The woman said, "You think so, but sometimes lessons need proof." Jordan was silent. He knew she was right, but his heart refused to make an enemy of anyone. Half an hour later, an internal announcement rang out. Passengers are allowed to use the airplane Wi-Fi. Just 3 minutes later, the blue lights from dozens of phones turned on in the cabin. Jordan sat still. He didn't want to check his phone. He didn't want to see the text messages, nor did he want to read his work emails. But then he heard the woman in row 3A whisper, "Oh dear, it's spreading." Jordan glanced over. She was looking at her phone screen, which had a short video clip, only about 11 seconds long. In the video, Patricia is pointing at Jordan, her face filled with anger. "He's making me feel unsafe." And a passenger's voice behind him clearly said, "No, ma'am. He's not." Jordan closed his eyes. He knew he didn't want this to spread, but he also knew no one controlled social media. A second later, the 4D chair's screen lit up. "Hey, The video just got reposted on a big account. 1 million views already. Jordan's heart sank as he listened. Before he could think, someone else interrupted. Is he really a shareholder? This will probably be in the news. I never thought I would see this in an airplane cabin. Jordan looked down at his hands and sighed. Just as he had predicted, the conversation was getting out of hand. A male flight attendant approached and whispered to Emily. Linda O'Neill from Ground Operations just texted. They've been notified of the incident and are preparing to meet the plane when it lands. Emily nodded, her face slightly worried. Jordan heard the name Linda O'Neill, a familiar one on the Ground Operations leader list. He knew Linda to be serious, fair, and unbiased. If she was notified, this was being flagged up at a higher level than usual. Jacob Hart approached Jordan, his face heavy. Mr. Miles, I need to warn you about something. Jordan looked up, waiting. When the plane lands, Mrs. Coleman will probably ask to see Linda to file a complaint. But Linda has reviewed the video recorded from the cabin camera system, and... Jacob paused for a moment as if weighing his words. And she has no intention of letting things go her way. Jordan was silent for a few seconds. Part of him felt lighter, but another part felt heavier because he didn't want anyone dragged into this war. Thanks for telling me, Jordan replied. Jacob nodded, then stepped back. He was clearly giving the respect he had initially lacked. As the plane began to descend, Captain Rhodes' announcement rang out. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to land in Atlanta. Please fasten your seatbelts. Jordan pulled his harness closer, feeling the slight vibration of the plane's fuselage as it cut through the clouds. His heart beat a little faster, not because he was afraid of heights, but because he knew when the cabin doors opened, things would not be the same as when he boarded this flight. When the plane hit the runway, the landing was smooth, but Jordan's heart was pounding. He told himself to stay calm, even though that was sometimes harder than facing a room full of people. When the plane stopped at the gate, the seatbelt sign turned off and everyone began to stand up. No one left the cabin immediately. Instead, a few people approached Jordan. Professor 1B put his hand on his shoulder. Son, no matter where this goes, you have left an impression that I believe we will all remember for a long time. Businesswoman 2A said don't be surprised if this video becomes the topic of the week. A young man laughed. I just hope the press doesn't bother you too much. Jordan smiled slightly, but his heart tightened slightly. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be in the spotlight. He just wanted to go home. Just then, the cabin door opened, and standing outside the door, waiting, was Linda O'Neill, with her crisp navy suit and eyes as sharp as the headlights shining down on the runway. His gaze swept across the cabin. No hatred, no anger. Just the seriousness of someone preparing to deal with something that had gone beyond expectations. Patricia saw Linda. Her face was as pale as a sheet. She whispered, "Oh no." Jordan stood up slowly, suitcase trailing behind him. He knew what was next was something he would have to face again, but this time, it wouldn't be just for him. The plane doors opened, and Atlanta air rushed in the smell of heat and humidity, and 100 planes breathing at once. Jordan stepped out of the cabin with a deep breath, trying to maintain the calm that had carried him through the challenging morning. Just outside, in the space between the jet bridge and the terminal entrance, things were quieter than he expected. No jostling crowds of reporters, no microphones shoved in his face, no flashbulbs. Only Linda O'Neill, standing straight, holding a tablet in her hand, her eyes hard but not cold. Mr. Miles, she said in a low but clear voice. Thank you for stepping up before things got chaotic. Jordan nodded slightly. I also don't want anyone to get dragged into this more than necessary. Linda tilted her head. Unfortunately, it was more than just necessary. The video went viral faster than we thought. Jordan breathed out softly. I know. They stepped into a small alley between the jet bridge and the terminal gates. Emily and Jacob stood a few steps behind a reminder that the witnesses to this story were also preparing to face their own responsibilities. Linda opened her tablet. On the screen was the interface of a social media platform. A video. A video of Patricia screaming that Jordan was threatening. Played, accompanied by a number 2.7 million views. Jordan looked for a few seconds and then closed his eyes. Linda said, "Is there anything you would like to say before the press gets involved? We can prepare a message to avoid misunderstandings." Jordan shook his head. "I don't want to turn this into a color war. I don't want it to be weaponized against anybody. I just want it to be understood." Linda looked at him for a long time. "You know, this is rare. People usually choose the side that helps them win, not the side that is right." Jordan replied softly, "I was simply too tired to win. I only had enough strength left to tell the truth." They entered the terminal together. As soon as they reached the arrival hall, Jordan saw a scattering of people. Some were looking at their phones, then up at him. Others pretended not to notice, but their eyes betrayed an undisguised curiosity. A middle-aged woman whispered, "That's right, he—" A young man picked up his phone to record, then stopped when he saw Jordan looking at him not hatefully, just a look that made him suddenly aware of his actions. Linda realized that. She said, "Turn this way. We have a private room prepared." Jordan didn't ask any more questions. He just followed her into a quieter hallway. Footsteps echoed steadily. Patches of light from the ceiling made small circles on the white tile floor. In the silence, Jordan could feel his heart beating not hard, but steady. He wondered if this would go beyond what he had intended. Would the people watching the video understand what he was trying to convey, or would they turn it into something else? Something he had no control over? In the small conference room, Linda pulled up a chair. "Please sit down. Some media representatives are on their way. They will be allowed in only with your permission." Jordan sat down. He stroked the wooden tabletop, an unconscious habit when he needed to steady his breathing. Jacob spoke up. "Mr. Miles, I know I didn't do my duty. I just wanted to say..." Sorry, Emily also said, "Me too. Not because I was asked to, but because I felt I should say it." Jordan looked at them for a moment, not long. Not tense, then said softly, "I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just want people to understand the most important thing. Never let leniency get in the way of fairness." Both heads bowed. No tears, no drama. Just genuine apology. Genuine. Linda opened the internal newsletter she had just received since this morning. "We have received more than 1,000 emails from passengers. 70% are in support of him. 20% are asking for an explanation from the airline. 10% are criticizing the tension between white and black passengers." Jordan frowned. "I don't want this to become divisive." "Nobody wants it," Linda said. "But that's how society reacts. Sometimes the truth doesn't stand still. It gets pulled in the direction people want it to go." Jordan was silent. Then he asked, "Where does the media stand?" Linda opens the list: NBC, CNN, Fox, 2 local newspapers, and 3 online channels. Jordan looked at the screen for a moment. Having lived a private life for years, he had avoided the media. He didn't like stories being cut and dried. He didn't like being a symbol of anything, especially issues related to discrimination. He said slowly, "I won't be doing interviews. At least not today." Linda nodded. "I think it was a wise decision." Jordan exhaled. "I don't want to make anyone out to be a villain. I just want to say that this shouldn't happen again to me or to anyone." Linda smiled slightly. "He doesn't need a microphone to be heard." Jordan raised his eyebrows. "You mean..." Linda tilted her head. "The video said it." Jordan laughed a sad laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. "That's right." A PR person knocked on the door and handed in an envelope. "Mr. Miles, this is a letter from CEO Charles Whitford to you. We were asked to hand-deliver it." Jordan took the envelope. It was neatly closed and heavier than he expected. He tore open the paper and pulled out a letterhead printed on North Star Airways letterhead. He read each line. His eyes darkened, then brightened a little, not with joy, but with appreciation. The letter was only about 6 sentences long. But the last sentence made Jordan pause the longest. "If you are willing, I would like you to join us in the meeting to restructure the new training process." Linda saw his expression. Will you join? Jordan looked out the window. The Atlanta light cast a soft glow on his face. Maybe. I should. Linda nodded. Not everyone has the courage to take greater responsibility after being treated unfairly. But you are that type of person, Jordan replied in a low voice. It's not because I'm brave. It's because many people don't have the same opportunities as me. When things calmed down, Jordan stood up, tugging on his jacket sleeve. I want to go home. Everything else? Tomorrow. Linda nodded. Of course, we'll escort you out the back door. As he walked down the back hallway, Jordan caught a few airport employees looking at him with respect. Not idolization, but a silent thank you. Jordan smiled slightly at them. This smile is not for victory, nor for the crowd. It's for you, for the quiet inner strength that keeps you upright all day long. Then he walked out the back door, where the company car was waiting. The Atlanta sun was still shining. But for Jordan, when the car door closed, what he wanted most was not peace, but a sigh long enough to believe that everything, eventually, would fall into place. The Atlanta sky was a pale orange that afternoon. The last rays of sunlight fell on the road like thin golden threads. Jordan's car drove smoothly from the airport onto the highway, leaving behind the chaotic sounds of a long, stressful day. Jordan leaned his head back against the seat, eyes half closed. He wasn't sleeping, just trying to keep his mind from drifting into the memories that were crashing against him like a wave. He thought of Patricia, of Emily, of Jacob, of the passengers who had stood up for him, and of the bigger picture, the one he knew he had to face the shakeup of the airline industry. Because Jordan understood he was no longer a victim of a small moment. He had become a character in a case study that the larger system would have to dissect. When the car pulled up in front of the Miles Tech office building, the company Jordan had founded, the atmosphere was different from usual. In the lobby, a few employees looked up at him with puzzled looks. Others stood to the side, as if not wanting to draw attention to him. But then a voice rang out, "Boss, are you okay?" Jordan turned around. It was Anthony Briggs, head of operations, who had been with Jordan for nearly 10 years. Anthony hurried over, his face full of worry but his eyes filled with absolute loyalty. I saw the video, Anthony said. I know you won't like it going around, but even if you don't say anything, we still have to protect you. Jordan slightly curled his lips. How to protect me? Anthony breathed heavily. The whole company has been arguing all afternoon. Many people want to make announcements, write analysis articles, post hashtags, but I told them not to do anything without my order. Jordan put his hand on Anthony's shoulder. Thanks, but this time, I don't want to turn personal matters into campaigns. Anthony nodded. I know, but you should know this people are proud of you. Because you kept your cool. Because you didn't shout. You didn't threaten. You didn't exaggerate. You just stood still and let the facts speak for themselves. That's more powerful than 1,000 speeches. Jordan looked into Anthony's eyes in their honesty. He felt a warmth run through his chest. I'm tired today, Jordan said softly. Give me some time. Anthony just whispered, we will stand behind you, wherever you need us. Jordan stepped into the elevator with a sigh. The support made him feel better, but it also made him more aware of the growing responsibility on his shoulders. On the 27th floor, the executive area, an informal meeting had spontaneously taken place hours before Jordan's arrival. All department heads, except Jordan, were present. On the large screen in the middle of the room was a video of Jordan being asked to change seats to avoid missing his flight. A young team leader, his face red with anger, slammed his hand on the table. He's our CEO. He's the nicest person I've ever worked with. How dare a flight attendant? The HR manager interjected, not because they dare, but because they think they can. Another said, do we need to issue a separate statement? Explain that Jordan didn't mean to spread the story, that he was just wronged. The communications director waved his hand. If we put out a statement, it will make a bigger deal, and he definitely doesn't want it. The whole room fell into a thoughtful silence, until Anthony walked in. Nobody does anything, he said firmly. He will decide for himself. A director asked, but Anthony, if he doesn't speak up, people will interpret the story in different ways. Anthony replied, his voice low but strong. Let them interpret. As long as we don't turn him into the fire that ignites a war he doesn't want. The whole room nodded. But we all know, the more silent the story becomes, the hotter the topic becomes. That evening, when Jordan returned home, he sat quietly in the living room. The soft yellow light filled the space. The city outside cast long shadows on the street. In the quiet room, he opened his phone for the first time since morning. There are 113 unread messages. There are 52 missed calls. There are 8 emails marked urgent. A message from his mother popped up first. Are you okay? I saw the video, and I just want to hug you. Jordan snorted, chuckling silently. His mother always knew how to hit the nail on the head. The next message was from Lisa Monroe. Co. of Miles Tech Jordan? I know you don't like the attention, but what you did on that flight, it shows you're stronger than those who only speak up when it's safe. Another message came from an old friend I used to keep quiet when similar things happened. Looking at you today makes me feel ashamed that I didn't speak up. Jordan pinched the bridge of his nose. These reactions, all good, made him realize that the conversation had gone further than he wanted. He wondered, would everything subside tomorrow, or flare up even more? Would he be pulled into the vortex he had been trying to avoid for so many years? Would this shatter the peace he had built for so long? While he was thinking, his phone vibrated. It was from CEO Charles Whitford. Jordan considered for a few seconds before picking up. Jordan, Charles said in a low but respectful voice. I want you to know something. No one in this industry can ignore this story today. Other airlines are in emergency meetings. The FAA is watching, and a group of corporate culture experts has reached out. Jordan was silent. Charles continued, I'm not calling to pressure you into anything. I just want you to know the way you reacted today has made many leaders in the industry look at themselves. Jordan leaned back in his chair. I don't want to be a symbol of anything. Charles, I know, Charles replied. But sometimes the symbol doesn't choose you. It chooses you. That statement made Jordan sit silent for a few seconds. Charles added, we have a meeting with the FAA and the Aviation Ethics Committee tomorrow. I want you to be there. Jordan closed his eyes and breathed softly. I will join. Charles said softly, thank you for not letting silence triumph. Jordan ended the call, but the words still echoed in his head. Don't let silence win. A simple sentence, but one that he had fought to keep all his life. He stood up and looked out the window. It was dark. The streetlights lit up, the sound of cars in the distance. The vast city continued to move forward. And he knew tomorrow. He would have to move forward too, whether he wanted to or not. The next morning, Atlanta was shrouded in a thin fog. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the large windows of North Star Airways headquarters, casting long streaks of light on the white marble floors. The tall, sturdy, and elegant building looked like a fortress of power, but today, even fortresses were a little shaky. Jordan walked into the main hall with Linda O'Neill. He wore a charcoal suit, white shirt, and no tie, his demeanor casual but steady as always. But his eyes were slightly dark, showing a weariness that had lingered from the night before. The receptionist recognized him immediately. She stood up, flustered. Hello, Mr. Miles. Please come straight up to the 38th floor. CEO Whitford and the executive team are waiting. Jordan nodded. He didn't want the attention, but it wasn't up to him anymore. The elevator went up in silence. There was only the soft sound of the engine and the soft light reflecting off the mirrors. Linda glanced at Jordan. Are you ready? Jordan smiled slightly. Readiness doesn't matter. We have to do it today. Linda breathed a sigh of relief, as if sympathizing more deeply with the man he had always tried to hide behind his calm demeanor. I know you don't like noise, but you should know. A lot of North Star employees are on your side. Jordan replied softly, I don't need them on my side. I just want them on the right side. The elevator doors opened. Ahead of them was the long hallway leading to the central conference room. There they found themselves with the same series of stairs. decisions, and tensions Jordan had sensed since last night. The 38th floor conference room was so large that even the slightest step could be heard. On the wall was a map of North Star's global flight network, with dozens of blue lines connecting Atlanta to the rest of the world. CEO Charles Whitford stood at the head of the conference table. His face was pale from lack of sleep, but his eyes were bright and determined. Jordan, thank you for coming. Charles's voice was low and calm, the kind of voice of someone used to crises but still maintaining dignity. Jordan shook his hand. I think we have a lot to talk about. Charles inclined his head, signaling for them to sit down. Around the table were nearly 20 leaders: HR, operations, training, communications, legal, and even the FAA representative who had just arrived. The atmosphere became so tense that everyone felt their breathing heavier than usual. Charles began. Yesterday, the incident on Flight 442 put North Star in a position we cannot take lightly. The video went viral. Passengers reacted angrily. And last night, 3 other airlines sent letters asking for cooperation in clarifying the matter. He paused for a moment and looked straight at Jordan. But most importantly, we owe you an apology. Jordan didn't reply. He just nodded, keeping his usual calm. HR manager Alyssa Grant opened her laptop and played the cabin camera footage a copy the operations team had extracted and secured. The screen shows Patricia Coleman saying he's making me feel unsafe. The room fell silent. A man at the end of the table swore under his breath. Fuck. Alyssa said we have reviewed the entire video. There is no indication that Mr. Miles posed a threat. All 3 flight attendants handled the situation in the wrong way, and asking him to leave his seat when he was a legitimate passenger violated both internal procedures and FAA law. Charles continued, Jordan, if you want, we will fire all 3. Jordan looked up, his eyes calm. No, I said it from the beginning, I don't want to destroy anyone. The whole room looked at him, as if they couldn't believe someone in his position could still say that after everything that had happened. Jordan added, I just want this system to change, not revenge on 3 people. Charles took a deep breath. That makes me respect you even more. The FAA representative, Mr. Harold Lansing, an elderly, serious man, sat up straight. We didn't just look at the video, we looked at 47 reports from passengers on the same flight. And I'll be honest, I've never seen a case where passengers came out in support of one person like that. Jordan paused slightly. The words took him by surprise. Harold continued. Mr. Miles, in 20 years of covering the aviation industry, I have rarely seen anyone stay as calm as you. And that calmness has caused us to reevaluate all of our flight crew training standards. The conference room fell silent. No one tapped a pen. No one breathed heavily. Only Jordan replied softly, I'm not perfect. I just don't want to fall for the wrong thing too many times. Harold nodded. Because of that, the FAA is going to require North Star to develop a new training program. And we want you to come in as an independent consultant. The whole room turned to Jordan. Linda gasped softly. She hadn't expected things to go this far. Jordan placed his hands on the table, thinking for a few seconds before speaking. I'm ready. But I don't want this show to be based on my story. It has to be based on thousands of other stories of people who don't have the opportunity to sit in this room. Charles squinted, as if he had just seen a ray of real hope. You're right. We'll build from the ground up, not from an accident. The meeting lasted another hour. They discussed new procedure when there is a seat dispute, responsibilities of each crew level, wrong way of handling pressured passengers, how to recognize unconscious bias, and a live reporting system that passengers can access with just one tap. Jordan listened, analyzed, and contributed each idea thoughtfully. There was no anger, no accusations, just candor and a character forged by years of being a black man, in a world where you had to prove yourself twice as much as anyone else. At the end of the meeting, and when everyone stood up, Charles walked over to Jordan and put his hand on his shoulder. You know, yesterday, when I got your email, I thought you were going to be angry. I thought you were going to call for mass disciplinary action. I thought you were going to want to retaliate. Jordan smiled slightly. Very slightly. If I lived only for revenge, I would no longer be me. Charles looked at him for a long time, then said what he himself admitted many years later was the only sentence he was forced to say with his heart instead of his head. Jordan, thank you for teaching us a lesson we should have learned long ago. Jordan didn't respond. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't need to. A nod is enough. Linda led Jordan to the elevator door. Her voice softened. Are you tired? Jordan chuckled. I was tired before I met you. Linda shook her head. Even though he was tired, he kept himself very well. Jordan replied, because if I lose my temper, I lose not to anyone else, but to myself. The elevator doors closed. Jordan stood alone. The light reflected off the mirror made his face look calmer than he felt. He had only one thought. This battle isn't about winning. This battle is about not having to fight someone else after me. After the meeting with the entire board of directors and FAA representatives, Jordan thought he would be able to leave the building immediately. But as he walked out of the conference room, Charles Whitford, his eyes slightly dark from lack of sleep, called him back. Jordan, we need to talk privately. Charles's tone was unstressed, but something in his calm told Jordan this would be the most important conversation of the day. Charles led Jordan to a small room off the CEO's office. The space was warmer than Jordan expected. Light gray walls, a large walnut desk, soft yellow lighting, and a glass window that looked out onto the Atlanta skyline. As the door closed, the space seemed to shrink, leaving only two men standing in two different positions of power. But today, meeting as people trying to fix a crack in a system that was too large. Charles poured a cup of coffee and pushed it towards Jordan Colombian coffee. I remember you liked it. Jordan smiled softly. You have a better memory than I thought, Charles replied in a low voice. When a shareholder like you speaks so frankly like yesterday, I have a responsibility to remember. The air fell a beat, not heavily, but deeply respectful. Charles sat down in the chair opposite. He no longer looked like the CEO of a major airline, but like a man who was seriously considering the value of his organization. Jordan, he began, I want to say something that I couldn't say yesterday in front of the entire room. Jordan looked up. Charles took a deep breath. North Star is facing its biggest cultural crisis since its founding. Jordan was silent, not surprised, but attentive. Charles continued. It wasn't yesterday's incident. Yesterday's incident was the last straw. We've been ignoring so many little warning signs, ignoring sporadic reports, ignoring complaints that we thought were small things. And now it's all spilling out at once. Jordan said softly, every system has cracks, but only when the pressure is great enough do people see them. Charles nodded, his eyes filled with honesty. Yes, and that pressure is you. Jordan smiled softly. I didn't mean to put pressure. Charles squinted. It's not you. It's your composure. It makes us all look in the mirror. In that moment, Jordan realized Charles wasn't trying to blame anyone. He wasn't trying to avoid it. He wasn't trying to appease. He was really trying to change. Jordan. Charles placed his hands on the table. I want you to be part of a comprehensive cultural change project at North Star. Jordan slowly put down his coffee cup. You want me to come in as an advisor? No. Charles shook his head. I want you to be a co-creator. Jordan stopped breathing for a second. Charles explained, I don't want to build a new curriculum. I want to build a new cultural model. What's the difference? Jordan asked. Charles replied, training helps correct errors. Cultural models help change behavior. Jordan looked straight at Charles, surprised that he understood something many other CEOs did not. You want to change from the root. Not just from the root, Charles said, I want to change from the very soul of the system. Jordan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the request. This was no mere formality. This was an invitation that came with responsibility, with pressure, with thousands of people working in the system he was about to help shape. Jordan asked softly, "Why me?" Charles replied immediately, without hesitation, "Because he brings something North Star lacks: unwavering integrity." Then he continued, "He didn't use anger to lead. He didn't use power to coerce. He didn't use a loud voice to dominate. He just stood still. And that standing still made the whole system move." Jordan was silent. Charles looked at him more deeply. He was the only person I ever met who could silence a room full of leaders, not because they were afraid of him, but because they respected his calmness. Jordan swallowed. He'd heard compliments before, but this one touched the deepest part of him, the part he'd tried to keep quiet for so many years. He said slowly, "I don't want to be an icon." Charles smiled sadly. "I know. But an icon isn't the person standing in front. An icon is the person who lets others know they can do better." A deep silence fell over the room. Jordan looked out the window. The morning city of Atlanta glittered like a mirror, reflecting the choices of millions. A North Star flew by in the distance, trailing white smoke like a faint pen mark. He closed his eyes for a few seconds to consider, to talk to himself, to ask his heart what he really wanted. When he opened his eyes, he said, "Charles, you know what? I've stood in front of too many doors that people didn't want me to walk through. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I wasn't like them." Charles was silent. Jordan continued, "And now, when I was most tired, you opened a door bigger than any before?" Charles replied softly, "This door is not for you to walk alone. I will go with you." A flash of emotion flashed in Jordan's eyes, an emotion he rarely showed. He nodded. "If so, I agree." Charles stood up, holding out his hand. Jordan took that hand, a handshake that was not just an agreement to cooperate, but a commitment to a long journey, a transformation that both knew would not be easy. Charles said, "Jordan, from now on, we are not just fixing a problem. We are fixing a culture." Jordan replied, "Not to be greater, but to be kinder." Charles laughed. "Kindness is what makes an organization great." Jordan chuckled, but it was the first smile all day that truly lit up his eyes. When they walked out of the room together, Linda was waiting in the hallway. She looked at Jordan with hopeful eyes. Done, Jordan nodded. "Yes?" "It started." Linda looked at him, a little confused. "Start what?" Jordan replied in a low but steely voice. "Start changing the whole North Star." And for the first time in 2 tense days, Jordan felt a weight lift in his chest. Not because it was over, but because he knew he would enter the next phase with a clear goal, a trustworthy ally, and a reason big enough not to give up. It was an afternoon at North Star headquarters. The large conference room on the 36th floor was lit by overhead lights, reflecting off the long wooden table like a road waiting to be walked. All the senior executives were gathered again, not this time to dissect mistakes, but to discuss the future, the new cultural model that Charles and Jordan had agreed upon only hours before. The atmosphere in the room, though not as tense as the morning meeting, was still serious and reserved. Everyone understood what was discussed today would affect all 30,000 North Star Airways employees. Jordan walked in with Charles and Linda. Everyone stood up reflexively, not because Jordan was a major shareholder, but because of the honor he showed on the flight honor that earned everyone's respect. Jordan gently signaled, "Please sit down. We have much to discuss." The way he spoke was not commanding, but still made the room more neat and focused. Charles opened. "Today we are talking about a new culture, a new training process, and a new evaluation system. Jordan will co-create it with us." Some people looked at Jordan with emotion. Others were a little nervous, not because they were afraid of him, but because they knew this change would affect many layers of the system. The head of training, Daniel Hargrove, about 50, white, with a kind face, asked Mr. Miles, "Can you tell me where you envision change?" "Starting." Jordan smiled and placed a stack of documents on the table. Start with the simplest thing, the question every employee must ask themselves before they react to any situation. The whole room looked at him, waiting. Jordan spoke slowly and clearly. Am I choosing the easy thing or the right thing? The room was silent. That simple question makes many leaders bow their heads. Jordan continued. On the flight attendant did the easy thing, asking the quiet person to move seats. But the right thing would have been to confront the person who was putting the wrong pressure. Linda nodded. We have been trained for years to keep the flight on time rather than keep it fair. Charles interjected, that was our mistake. Daniel spoke up, I absolutely agree morally. But operationally, we have to admit that dealing with difficult passengers always results in flight delays. That affects thousands of people. A few leaders nodded. Jordan didn't react immediately. He looked at Daniel with such a calm gaze that Daniel was a little confused. Then Jordan asked, if I wasn't me that day, not a shareholder, what would have happened? Daniel was silent. Jordan continued, his voice dropping a beat. The wronged remain silent. The perpetrators continue to believe they are right, and we inadvertently reinforce a culture of injustice. The room fell silent again. Jordan concludes, being 5 minutes late is better than losing the kindness of a system. Chief of Flight Operations. Gregory Shaw? A straightforward man with a somewhat gruff voice, I understand what you mean. Mr. Miles, but the reality is not always as you say. If flight attendants keep confronting passengers unreasonably, the risk of escalating the conflict is very high. Jordan listened, then replied softly, the problem is they don't have the tools to confront it properly. Gregory frowned. What tools? We trained them for hundreds of hours. Jordan tilted his head. They learn how to handle technology. They don't learn how to handle people. Gregory blushed slightly, but not from anger, but from realizing Jordan's words were so true that it was hard to refute them. Linda interjected, we have never had a clear code of conduct that addresses unconscious bias. Employees are left to guess what the safest decision is. Jordan continued, it's not their fault. It's the system's fault. Charles looked around the table and said firmly, and it's our responsibility to fix it now. Jordan opened the document. On the first page were the words, North Star Culture Reset, the 4 anchors. He explained, this is not a slogan. This is a principle of action. He pointed to each item. 1. Equity. First, every decision must prioritize fairness for the right person, not comfort for the wrong person. 2. Respect. Under pressure, respect even under pressure. Passengers may lose their cool, but employees must not lose their dignity. 3. Courage to confront. Courage to confront what's wrong. Don't let silence legitimize harmful behavior. 4. Calm leadership. Leading with calmness. Calmness is not weakness, but strength to keep the system from slipping out of orbit. The whole conference room was silent. Many people nodded slowly as if they had just found something they had been missing for a long time. Alyssa, head of HR, speaks up, Mr. Miles. I really have to say this. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with emotion. When I saw the video of him saying, I will not leave my chair, I cried. Because I remembered our employees who were treated wrongly, but were not in a position to say that. Jordan looked at her for a long time. A strange emotion entered his eyes, one that was sad and light, and made him feel less alone. She continued, this company needs your voice, and those who are not being heard need your voice too. Jordan replied softly, almost in a whisper, I will do my best. Charles stood up, I announced. As of today, North Star Airways will officially launch the Culture Reset Project, with Jordan Miles as co-creator and senior advisor. The whole room applauded, but it was a deep, quiet applause. It was an acknowledgement that today was the day they really looked back at themselves. Charles said louder, and I want us to have our first working session next week. Jordan's model will be the foundation. Gregory also said I will adjust the operating procedures according to the new pillar. Daniel said I will rewrite the entire training framework. Alyssa, I will put in place an employee evaluation system. Linda smiled. I will prepare the ground team to do the first test. Jordan paused. He wasn't used to being at the center of such a big decision. But this isn't a spotlight. This is responsibility and a chance to fix something that should have been fixed a long time ago. Jordan said softly, "Thank you, everyone. I just hope one thing we don't do it for the video. We do it for the right thing." Charles replied immediately, "We do what is right." When the meeting ended, Jordan stood up, feeling as if he had just emerged from a day that weighed more than a year. But strangely, he didn't feel tired. He felt clearer. Be clear about what you need to do. Be clear about who you're going with. Be clear about why you can't back down. On the way out of the meeting room, Linda walked beside him, her voice soft as a confession. "You know, Jordan, yesterday you just wanted to keep your seat. But today, you helped thousands of people keep their justice." Jordan laughed out loud, a rare, warm laugh. I never expected a chair to cause such a big problem. Linda replied, "It's not the chair. It's how you stand up for what's right." Jordan was silent, but in that silence and his heart found peace in a way he had long awaited. 3 days after the historic meeting at North Star Airways, Atlanta was awash with sunshine. The kind of sunshine that wasn't too harsh, but spread across the ground in soft golden patches, like the light you see on hopeful mornings, the kind that makes you believe that even the hardest things can start over again. Jordan stood in front of the glass door of his office at Miles Tech. He looked down at the city below, where thousands of people were still traveling, living their lives, unaware that a major change in the aviation industry was about to begin, a change that started with a small moment on a flight. His phone vibrated. It was a text message from Charles Whitford Jordan. "Today we're announcing the Culture Reset program. I'd like you to give the opening remarks. Not as a shareholder, but as someone who reminds us of what's most important." Jordan exhaled slowly. He didn't like being on camera. He didn't like being the center of attention. But he knew there were times when people had to speak, not because they wanted to, but because they needed to. He replied, "I will come." The press conference was held in the main hall of North Star headquarters. The room was large, white-lit, and displayed the company logo on a dark blue background. More than 20 journalists were present, along with hundreds of employees who attended online. As Jordan entered, a low murmur arose. Not loud, but respectful and curious. Charles went to the microphone first. "We are not here today to hide mistakes. We are here to admit them, to make amends, and to build a new culture for North Star Airways." Then he turned to Jordan. "And now, I invite the person who made us look at ourselves. Jordan Miles." Jordan stepped up to the podium. No camera flashes, no shouts. There was only silence and inviting silence. Jordan took a deep breath and began, "Thank you, everyone, for coming." His voice was low and light, but echoed evenly in the auditorium. "I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm not here to recount what happened that day. Because it's not just about me. It's about so many people, people who have had similar experiences in the past. But there were no cameras, no passengers to protect them, no one to believe them." Jordan looked down at his hands, then looked up again. "That day, I was sitting in a seat I had paid for. But another passenger believed that if she just said it out loud, that seat would be hers." A few people in the hall nodded, emotions rising. Jordan continued. "And there was a moment. I thought about standing up. Not because I was wrong, but because I was tired. Because I was so used to having to justify my presence in places where I had a right to be." He paused for a beat, but I didn't stand up. Not to win. Not to get even. But because I didn't want to keep telling those who came after me. If they push you again, give in. Just give in. The atmosphere seemed to sink, then rise again with emotion. Jordan looked straight at the North Star executive's corporate culture as not a slogan on the wall. Culture is the choices we make in difficult times. It is how we treat the vulnerable when no one is looking. It is whether we choose the right thing, even when it takes time. The whole room was absolutely silent. Some people held hands, some wiped their eyes. Jordan continued, his voice softening. I'm not a hero. I'm just tired of being silent. Then he turned to the big screen. Where the culture reset plan was displayed, I agreed to be part of this program. Because I believe if a small chair can open a big conversation, then a big system like North Star can start over for the better. Jordan smiled slightly, a smile from the heart. Not from the lips. I believe kindness can be taught. I believe fairness can be practiced. And I believe calm can be contagious. He bowed his head. Thank you, everyone, for giving me hope that the next flight will be fairer for all of us. The whole hall applauded. No noise, no fanfare. But it's the kind of applause that comes from empathy for something everyone has experienced, but not everyone dares to say out loud. After the event, Jordan walked out into the back hallway. Linda was waiting for him, smiling proudly. You did very well, Jordan replied softly. I just say what I believe. Charles approached and shook his hand. Firmly. Jordan, thank you. From today on, we will do better. Jordan looked him straight in the eye. Do the right thing even if no one is filming. Charles nodded vigorously. I promise. As Jordan was about to leave the building, a young employee about 25 years old ran up. A little hesitant, Mr. Miles. I just want to tell you something. Jordan turned back, smiling. I'm listening. The employee trembled slightly. I've never been through anything like this. But my dad has been through it. He was asked to leave a seat he had reserved, and he backed down. Because he didn't want trouble. His voice gradually became smaller. Yesterday, my dad watched his video. He cried. He said, I wish I had the strength to do what he did. Jordan stood still. His heart seemed to constrict for a moment. He thanked the young man in a warm, sincere voice. Thanks for letting me know. It means more than any compliment. The clerk bowed his head and then stepped back. As Jordan stepped out the door, the afternoon sunlight spread across the steps like a golden carpet. He took a deep breath, the heaviness in his chest finally feeling lighter. Not because things were good, not because the system was perfect, but because I know today I'm not fighting alone anymore. You have leaders standing by you. You have employees believing in you. You have a system ready to change from a seemingly small story. Jordan walked down the steps, adjusted his vest collar, and whispered something only he could hear. Hope also needs someone to protect it. And today, he protected that hope. Jordan Miles's story is not his own. It mirrors the journey many of us have been on, the silence we have endured when we have been wronged, the patience we have developed to avoid conflict, and the times we have convinced ourselves to let it go. But there are moments in life that require us to stand up, not to win, but to be right. But to be. Jordan did what many dream of. He chose to defend his dignity, with calm, wisdom, and dignity. The most important lesson from this story is justice doesn't happen by itself. It happens when someone has the courage to say no. Kindness doesn't spread by itself. It spreads when we model it. And hope only exists when we protect it. At any age, we all have scars from being misunderstood or misjudged. Jordan's story reminds us that every wound can become a strength if we dare to face it. Hopefully, after hearing this story, you will feel stronger, lighter, and know that sometimes just the right attitude, the world will change a little. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If the story touches you, makes you think, or reminds you of yourself, please like the video, share it with those who need it, and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. Your support is what keeps us going, telling stories that are real, deep, and touch the heart.